thoughts, in fact, even words that are coming through you, okay? And we will have an opportunity to share these thoughts, feelings, and feedback, even comments, right? I know for some folks, this might look like just a title page and we just move forward, but I actually enjoy the discussion, and we'll spend some short time with this one. All right. I believe that might be ample time. Let's begin. What are you seeing here? Who are you seeing here? Tell me your thoughts. I hope this is big enough. Who are these people? There you go.
I see mostly celebrities, at least that I can recognize.
Who are they?
Well, there's Rachel Maddow,
Mm-hmm.
our news anchor,
Mm-hmm.
Caitlyn Jenner,
Mm-hmm.
Ellen DeGeneres, probably from 25 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Hillary Swank,
Mm-hmm.
RuPaul. I see a lot of healthy, able-bodied, beautiful people.
Right. Very good. I love that last portion. Thank you, Jenna. What about Molly, Ann, and Slater? What are you seeing? Who are you seeing? Are these faces familiar to you? And how do you know them?
Yeah, some of them I don't know, but some very familiar faces. And even if I don't know their names, they, like Jenna said, are famous celebrities.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm also noticing, you know, the Ellen DeGeneres cover from a long time ago, and then more recent, like showing a timeline
Yes.
of change or recognition.
Mm-hmm.
I'm seeing that.
Thank you. Thank you for noticing that timeline. Thank you. Thank you. And thoughts? Even like just general thoughts.
Well, I see, I don't know everybody on here, but I know a few of them.
Mm-hmm. Similar to both Jenna and Molly?
Similar.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Slater, I don't know if you're seeing what we're seeing and if you want to join in. And if it's okay if you don't want to. I'll give you a moment.
I think Slater wrote that there's a problem with the computer or something.
Oh, no. We perhaps our folks from WSSC-SW might be able to assist. So far, everybody's seeing it. I'm not seeing a glitch on my end. And this is also it's being recorded, Slater. So I hope that you can possibly watch it afterwards as well. But if you're able to communicate with us audibly, we can entertain that as well. So, all right. I love all of your comments and feedback. In fact, only at this training that I've heard someone mention the timeline, that I explicitly mentioned that. So I appreciate that. Thank you so much. So, and it sounds like almost the majority of you have similar feedback, that you all know the same people, right? Notice too that it's a majority of who appear to be white and cis, right? Caucasian and cisgender, right? There's very few of color. So here's what I'll do. I'm going to start from where Ellen is and then kind of move my way in that direction for context. So yes, that is correct. That is Ellen DeGeneres on the cover of Time magazine when she came out, actually through her show, Ellen, right? But here's the thing. She got on the cover of it and the public chastised her. Her career actually tanked. Not a lot of people recognize that or know that about her celebrity trajectory. She came back up. Now she's famous again, right? And is a household name with her show, etc., right? With her life and being an out lesbian. Boys Don't Cry Up Above is a movie about that portrayed by Hillary Swank and played the role of Brandon Tina, who was born Tina Brandon. It's the story of a trans man, and at the time was living no op as a man, and unfortunately died and was killed by a group of men, and there were women in that group as well because of their identity or his identity. In this one, Hilary Swank actually won an Oscar for this. Why I point this out is the story is real, the narrative is true, but it's portrayed by a cisgender Hollywood actress, right? It's great that's what actors do, right? They portray something that's either that emulates who they are or something far from who they are. But what this has done, and you'll see in a moment here how this timeline kind of changes, is that there was really no room for LGBTQ people to actually star as themselves or portray the identities that they identify with, right? On the cover of Out magazine is RuPaul. I think at this point, everybody knows RuPaul's Drag Race, and you don't have to be LGBTQ to have heard of the name RuPaul, right? She came to fame as a singer back in the day, decades ago, has photographs with Nirvana, etc., right? Janet Mock is an MSNBC correspondent and author advocate. She is an out trans Black woman, and she wrote this book called Redefining Realness about her journey in transition. Below her is Margaret Cho, a Korean American TV and film actress. She had a show on TV, short-lived, but it was oh gosh, now it's at the tip of my tongue. It's like The American Life or All American Girl was the title, but it was a Korean American, right? So it wasn't as successful because the image that people think of is not her, to put it bluntly. Right? She's an amazing comedian. She's out about her bisexual identity as a Korean American. Next, we have Vanity Fair cover, Caitlyn Jenner. This was pretty historical, major magazine, yet again, right? But what this did was it showed that, well, the stereotype that trans women look like her, but it really did not portray the majority of the lives and narratives of trans women, particularly of color, where access to economics is challenging. We don't have the same access as she does, right? And if people followed her from her time as an Olympian to her more recent stint, with the show Keeping Up with the Kardashians, this sort of turn of events of her transition was almost overnight. It wasn't literally overnight, but from our perspective, it was overnight. That is not the typical, storyline or timeline of someone's transition. It can be, but it's not the majority. So it portrayed this sort of fantasy version, right? For most people, that's a fantasy. But what it did was it portrayed a stereotype of what trans women look like. And then we've got Rachel Maddow, cover of Rolling Stone, very famous. You all know her. Pose is a TV series by Ryan Murphy, who really focuses a lot on LGBTQ narratives and stories. Pose it pays homage to the documentary Paris is Burning. And then we get here to the cover of Time magazine with Laverne Cox, who was actually on the cover, but somehow Caitlyn Jenner's cover on Vanity Fair kind of took precedent, took more prominence. And Laverne Cox is one of the lead actresses on the Netflix series, Orange is the New Black. And she portrays a trans woman, and she herself is a trans woman. So this one was entitled the transgender tipping point. It was starting to recognize how there was more prominence and visibility of trans people. Right below her, more local people. This is Justice Mary Yu with the short duo, I believe pearl earrings. She is an out lesbian, Asian, and Latina Supreme Court Justice, and she is in there now. And I don't have a photo of Justice Helen Whitener, Helen Whitener, who is an out lesbian Black Supreme Court Justice as well. Cal Anderson to her left, the black and white photo, that's Cal Anderson. He, as far as we know, the first openly gay politician in Washington State. He preceded then Senator Ed Murray, who became then mayor of Seattle. And Cal Anderson's legacy was around domestic partnership, which eventually became marriage equality throughout the United States. And below him is Anderson Cooper. Anderson Cooper is a very renowned correspondent and newscaster on CNN. He is also an out gay man, the son of Gloria Vanderbilt. Excuse me. Next to the word CNN is Jazz Jennings, believed to be the youngest prominent trans celebrity. She was in her teens when she came out, and she had a TLC series on there. Pardon me. Let me just grab some liquid. Oh, I'm overcoming a shot, a reaction. Apologies. And then far to our right, on top is Gina Rosero. Gina Rosero is a Filipino-American supermodel who had a TED Talk roughly in 2012, where she came out as trans. So she had been a very successful supermodel, and no one knew that she was trans-identified or transgender until she came out via TED Talk. So I encourage you to see that as well. Right below her is Isis King, who was basically outed on America's Next Top Model with Tyra Banks. At the time, she was pre-op, but she identified as a trans woman, and she was scouted because she was one of the sort of the extras on one episode, and the next episode she was recruited for the show, and it was quite controversial and in a lot of ways kind of demeaning and shaming because she couldn't be with the other girls like in the restrooms, etc. So it was quite traumatic, you know, for some audience members, and I can even imagine what it was like for her. But since then, she has maintained her status as a supermodel also, and is a esteemed advocate for the trans community. So yeah, so this is just a snippet. By all means, this is not the entire LGBTQ spectrum. And I know the topic today is LGBTQ and intersection of BIPOC identities. And here's the problem right here. When you Google LGBTQ, it's predominantly going to be white cis people. Like I had to put in the POC folks in here. Just a simple Google search alone gives you that issue, right? All right, so let's move right along. So for today, our learning objectives is to increase our knowledge and awareness of LGBTQ culture and history and the impact of racial and ethnic identities, and hopefully increase our skills. And I keep saying our because I learned from everybody as well, and tools that LGBTQ plus and BIPOC competent and affirming services. And remind ourselves again that we are all experts in this ride. And just some general guidelines. Because of the limited time, I really love doing this for like 2 hours, and sometimes it's not even enough because of the back and forth Q&A and the discussion that happens. It won't be as interactive as I hope it to be. I know, sad panda face, and I will slow down as you request me to, and I'm happy to do that. And if what I'll do is per slide or so, or each content, I'll pause and ask if you have any questions, just in case you forget at the very end, or it might be, you know, burning and we want to take care of it right there and then. Okay. And please feel free to reach out to me afterwards if you have any lingering questions or even comments. Okay. For now, temperature check. Good. Thumbs up. All right. Thank you so much. I can see folks, but I just can't see the chat, unfortunately. All right. So you don't have to memorize all the winners of RuPaul's Drag Race. So that was that little tidbit there. So again, I want to acknowledge that I am coming to you live on Duwamish land, of the Coast Salish peoples. And as a proud immigrant from the Philippines, I ask permission from the native peoples to become part of this land's history and legacy. And I encourage everyone to also do the same wherever you may be, to recognize that, and where your families have come from, and now the land that you now wish to call your homes as well. So I encourage everyone to do that. And for those that may be unfamiliar, Duwamish land is where Seattle sits, and it is named after Chief Sealth. So yeah, and I'm Aleks Martin again. I primarily use she pronouns, but he and they are okay. And I've started to embrace my native tongue of the Philippines, and our pronouns are siya. So my pronoun is siya. If you remember it, people might say siya, like the singer. That's an easy one to remember, or siya. And here's one tidbit I'd like to share with all of you. Filipino pronouns are actually not gendered. Neither are they masculine, neither are they feminine. They're all gender. The only thing that's important to us is the grammaticalness of it. The grammaticalness, that's not even grammatical by saying grammaticalness, is that it's either singular or plural. Siya is like one person. Sila is a group of people, right? But now we also know that them is an acceptable singular pronoun for people. And I share this because in American culture, and at least in English-speaking cultures, I often hear, oh, but it's so difficult to change. You know, you look this way and you want me to say it a different way. It's what I'm used to. Well, to this culture and language it is, but to other cultures, it is not. So it's a matter of embracing someone else's identities, right? And Salome already mentioned a little bit of what my background is. You can just read through this. Part of my identity is, besides being a proud immigrant, I identify Philippine X from the Philippines. I also identify genderqueer. And that's been my, I've been identified with this for the past roughly 10 plus years now. And I share this because prior to that, I just identified as a gay man. And this was when I had limited vocabulary. That was because I thought that that's what it was supposed to be, that was my trajectory, right? And then over the years, and thank goodness for the younger generation for teaching us, I have now embraced the genderqueer identity because it encompasses both my sexual orientation and my gender expression and identity. And I also do drag. For those that might be curious, I go by Aleks Manila. And I use a lot of my social work lens, my social justice lens in my persona, because I think that I have an opportunity, and also other folks have an opportunity to use that platform to engage people in conversation and expanding our minds and our hearts. Yeah. And I do a lot of community organizing. I also founded Pride Asia back in 2012, and our mission is to celebrate, empower, and nurture the multicultural diversity of the LGBTQ communities through the Asian Pacific Islander lens. So as you can see and hear, this is near and dear to me. A lot of my clinical work came from Seattle Counseling Service, an LGBTQ nonprofit behavioral health agency, believed to be the oldest one in the country, if not the universe. I spent my time there for almost 20 years, 16 plus years. I definitely grew up there, and I found a home there as a clinician. And I hope that you get to experience something similar in your own respective fields. All right. So now I'm curious with everyone else, who are you? Who are we? What's your, and it seems like we've got an intimate crowd. I think we might be able to go through with everybody, or just whoever's comfortable, maybe one or two folks. I'm interested in sharing and having you share your name. And here's the thing, names. We think that this is something so simple. Here's the thing, it can be a preferred name, it could be your nickname. For some people, we don't even realize it's their nickname. And all this time we've thought that it's their legal full name, right? And it's not. It could even be your stage name if you'd like, right? Your pronouns. Here's the thing, people often always misrepresent us by the way we look. We have to ask. We have to be able to give space so that we can proclaim what pronouns we use. And for some people, this is the first step in recognizing who they are and how they want to present themselves in public and in social settings, right? And I don't necessarily mean either just the ones who have a stereotypical different pronoun than how they appear. This goes for everyone. And I want to challenge folks who say, of course I'm a he. You definitely want to challenge that, because how it just so happens that how they identify matches with their pronouns. But saying something like that can be damaging when other people hear it. Now think for example, younger people or people who haven't come out. It really creates a space that isn't safe at all. So it's good to practice this. The other one is race. You'd be surprised. And I love doing this exercise as well, because oftentimes we rely on our visual cues. Well, obviously you're Asian, or obviously you're this and that. That's not true. And there are many folks who, and we'll just say it for the context of this conversation, white passing, for example, but we don't realize they actually have other races and ethnicities that they embrace, right? But because of that white passingness, they're treated only to be white, and they want to so embrace their other heritages, right? And their other cultures. But because they are perceived to be one specific race, then they're only treated that way. So if we create space to be able to exclaim our identities, right, racial and etc., then we can be fully ourselves and be understood and embraced in that way. Our roles. What do you do now? What job responsibilities do you do? And this will just provide context just for the professional setting of the training. So yeah, any takers who'd like to practice this? Oops.
I can start. My name's Michaela. My pronouns are she, her, or they, them. I come from a multiracial background, and I completely relate to the visual cues, because for people who are kind of come from a Western European background, they usually say assume that's what I am, versus more often people of color will say, hey, what are you? Because I have other kind of facial features that indicate that that's not entirely my background. So I think that's always a really interesting one to talk about. In my role, I am a licensed independent clinical social work associate. A lot of my background is working in community-based settings, doing a lot of work with individuals who experienced a lot of trauma and gender-based violence. Currently, I'm in a private practice, and I work with a variety of individuals, and I have actually multiple clients who identify as part of the LGBTQ population. I'm working with a young teen who actually just started gender affirming hormone therapy. And so that's been a really interesting process for us to work with in providing support, because they don't get a lot of support from their family of origin, and they don't really have a lot of connection to the LGBTQ community at this point. So, yeah.
Thank you, Michaela. And I'm looking at the clock. We may only have one. We only have time for one. I'm so sorry, everyone else. But Michaela, you mentioned that you're multiracial. Would you mind sharing what those are?
Yeah, my dad is Eastern European background. He's from the Midwest, and my mom is Pueblo Indian, Spanish, and Mexican.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Yeah, very true. In this culture, we associate race with really the color of our skin, right? But when you travel elsewhere, people associate it with the country of origin. It's such a different conversation when we travel, right? Outside of this, and even just going up to Canada, the conversation is different around identities. All right. So warning, and I'll go through this quickly. Some of the forthcoming images and language, some people might find explicit. These are intended for educational purposes to increase our understanding of other people's perspectives, okay? And I want to thank everyone in advance. So here's the thing, when you do a Google image search, and now I know this can vary from person to person, it also depends on your computer and what you look through and what they are. But when you Google the word lesbian, it will be images of feminine women intimately together. But here's the thing, feminine, 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 or oftentimes this binary that one has to be masculine looking and one has to be feminine looking. And it's often, if you look, intimacy, kissing. Not that there's anything wrong with it, right? But this is when you type in lesbian, right? The majority of the images are going to be about intimacy, kissing. And if you notice again, white, 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 white. When you Google gay, it's going to be images of masculine men intimately together. Now, I think this is pretty obvious. Naked, 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 right? Very sexual. And again, white, 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 right? Oh, by the way, I missed this one. You can't see it in here, but it's in the below one. I could only capture a section of it. But somehow Kelly Clarkson showed up under gay. God bless her. And then when you type in bisexual, now previously you saw images of people, men, women, cisgender, right? Now, when you type in bisexual, oh my goodness, symbols. Where's the human images? Where's the people images? The clothes are cartoons. Discovering your bi is a cartoon. This is so sadly representative of the conversation. Like they're not seen, right? Often you might hear the phrase, "Oh, you're just confused. Pick one already." And when you Google transgender, often what's going to happen is images of trans victims. You'll see images of Laverne Cox, Caitlyn Jenner, but then sadly, oh, and then the before and after is usually what pops up, right? And then sometimes you'll see men with wigs. That's what comes up. And then when you type in queer, and then it becomes about flamboyance, which isn't very true at all, right? You'll start seeing, references to Queer Eye for the Straight Guy, the show. I get it. The word queer is in that, and it's been made mainstream. So it's a good way in some ways, but it's a mixture, right? And it's often about flamboyance. So what happens when you type in straight? Why am I showing this? Here's why. When we now, granted, yes, this is what straight means. But what I'm trying to show here is it then becomes not about sexuality or orientation. It just becomes about objects. Because what's being told to us now is straightness doesn't need to be Googled. It's the norm. All right, quick crash course on sex and gender. And I'm happy to discuss this even deeper if you want to contact me afterwards. Now, our sex, which is biological, and sometimes, and we'll get more into this, the whole assigned sex at birth, and our sexual identities are different from gender identity and our expression. Think of it as internal and external, right? And I'll keep diving into this some more. In short, sex and gender are two different things. Sex and gender are two different things. Here's another way to try and digest this. Who you sleep with is different from who you sleep as. Now, I don't want to take credit for this because I heard this as well. For the life of me, I've Googled this so much, I can't find the original author. But I want to be transparent about that. This is not coming from me. I heard this as well. Who you sleep with is different from who you sleep as. The sleeping part, I know it's a bit pronounced, but really it's about attraction, right? You don't necessarily have to sleep with someone, right? Around attraction. But who you're attracted to is different from who you are, right? The sleeping, that's why it's sleep there, because how do you sleep? Who are you when you sleep? Who is that person, right? That's a different identity. Here's another, I'm going to share with you a couple of toolkits as well that I hope you find helpful. And I won't be surprised if you're already familiar with them. I'll start with the first one. This has a lot of history. This is called the Gender Bread Person, and it's created by Sam Killerman. I actually got permission to use it. Now, this is the first version. I believe he's now up on version 4 because it's ever evolving as the conversations continue. And I love that. But what I love about the first version is how simple it is. The Gender Bread Person talks about how our identity, our orientation, our sex, and expression are all 4 distinct features, right? So for example, I use myself as an example. As far as my sexual orientation, I fall under homosexual, right? Based on my physical, right? So my biological sex is that I am male. I am AMAB, assigned male at birth. As far as I know, I'm not intersex. But sometimes I question that. And then as far as my gender expression, I fall between feminine and androgynous. And as far as my gender identity, I always felt like kind of between woman and I never used the genderqueer wasn't an acceptable phrase at the time. But now for the last 10 plus years, I have now embraced that identity because it really has that fluidity that I value in the way I identify myself and how I express myself. So yeah, that's where I fall under. And I've shared this document as a PDF with Salome, and I assume she'll share that with all of you, and you can kind of play with this as well. Now, there's a lot of criticism with this one as well, because Sam Killerman, a comedian, is a self-identified cisgender heterosexual male. And so the criticism is that, why is that person telling us who we are? And so here's the response. We have the gender unicorn. And this was created by two folks, Landon Pan and Anna Moore, who fall under the more expressive identities. Here's what I love about this. It's not in the binary. If you notice with this previous one, it goes left to right. If you look at the arrows. So it kind of still follows that binary system, right? That black and whiteness, maleness and femaleness, that sort of thing. But then if you look at the gender unicorn, it starts from a point and it just moves forward. So it doesn't follow that binary. The other thing too that's really beautiful is specifying the sex, meaning sex assigned at birth. What were you assigned as at birth? There are so many intersex people that were, and I'm going to put air quotes on this, who were mutilated and assigned a certain sex. And generally, they gave them a female assigned birth identity. And most, a significant number of these folks now as adults are just now finding out. So check out isna.org, and that's focused on intersex here in North America. So check it out. And then I love the physical attraction and the emotional attraction. I love this very much because it distinguishes, again, physical versus emotional. And I love that this also is so sex positive that it recognizes polyamory, for example, right? And says nothing about your identity, whether you're attracted to a person of a different identity. For example, trans-amorous people. Many trans-amorous people, for example, a cis male is going to identify as a straight man, but is attracted to, say, a trans woman. They're not gay. They're not attracted to the masculinity. They're attracted to the femininity. And so some of them, and the trans-amorous identity is still a new term that's being slowly embraced, but I really enjoy this gender unicorn and the way things are even more dissected. So check this out, okay? And I hope that you find either of them helpful. Now, we'll dig a little deeper. Understanding LGBTQ history starts with understanding the history of our oppression and discrimination that our communities have faced. For many communities, particularly in the LGBTQ community, bars and clubs were a place of refuge. Fortunately, there's alcohol in there, but that's a different topic. That's a different presentation around addiction and how that impacts the LGBTQ community, which creates health disparities. But I want to point out a critical moment in American history. In June 29, 1969, at the Stonewall Inn, a bar, a known bar, an underground bar, where folks met at a time when it was illegal to be gay. 1969, there are people who were born in 1969 and walk among us. It was illegal to be gay. For many people, this is part of their lifetime. And by the way, this place is still around. It's in New York City. It's in the Greenwich Village of New York City in Manhattan. And during the Obama administration, this was named a historic place. But I want to point out two people that have been known significantly with this uprising. And it was Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, two trans women of color. At the time, they didn't really embrace the term trans as an identity. If and when you would hear it, and then this is just because of the timeline and the generation, you might hear people say transsexual as part of their identity. But again, that was because it was just vocabulary was limited. In fact, many of them were doing drag, and that was the identity, right? And so many of them were actually stage performers. And so Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera were believed to be the prominent figures of the Stonewall Uprising that ended up in about 3 days of rioting on the streets. The following year, the last Sunday of June of 1970, was the first Pride celebration. So this is how Pride started. It started as a riot. Now, what I'd like to point out is another key figure. This is Stormy de la Rivera, a trans man who is often erased in the narrative of the Stonewall riots. And this disheartens me because I have just recently learned about who he is, right? oftentimes, even though you've got trans women that are and of color are prominently recognized, AFAB, assigned female at birth individuals, are not recognized. And I think this is partly because of the sexism that can exist even within LGBTQ and POC, conversations. However, on the positive, I'm very happy that they recognize people of color. A few years back, there was a film, sort of a mockumentary of the Stonewall riots, but the storyline was that they made the hero, the main figure, a cisgender white male. And so LGBTQ activists were like, no, that's not true. These are the people behind the Stonewall riots. Why would you do that? And I read one article where it was saying something along the lines of, and I'm paraphrasing, to make it more palatable for the mainstream audience. Ouch. Whitewashing. All right. Now, here are some other issues to be cognizant of that are social and environmental determinants affecting the health of LGBTQ people. Still to this day, they're still in some parts of the globe, and not just here. And it's going to be important to recognize that we are a melting pot, right? People come from all over the place. It's slowly happening, but thanks to ENDA, the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, health insurance issues isn't as problematic. Now, here's the thing. There's policy, but then there's practice, right? Just because you can say, well, the law says, but how are they practicing it? And I would argue rural parts of our country, right? How does that actually take into place? I'm sure it's happening. And even big companies, Boeing, Microsoft, Amazon, yes, you have those affinity groups that exist, but how are the day-to-day work days of individuals who are out LGBTQ people? How are their work days like when they have to interact with other coworkers, right? Sure, there are protections, right? But then how are those day-to-day things happening? And even though marriage is happening now, we still have criticism, like they want to get married inside a church, and sometimes it doesn't happen, and sometimes it does. And we know there's different sects of faith, so that's happening for some people. Retirement benefit, it's still all up in the air. It's still not quite 100%. And even though there are anti-bullying, efforts, we know that it happens. We know that it happens. Right? So we still have to be aware of all those things. The bathroom usage, right? I want to remind folks, about 5 years ago, the city of Seattle, any single-use toilets for public use need to be re-identified as an all-gender restroom. Now, critics of that effort made it about trans people, and it wasn't. It was about access for everyone. If it's a single-use stall, people who are on, say, wheelchairs or crutches or need a mobility device, they need to be able to access that single-use restroom. It also recognizes that some people may need assistance by a person of a different gender or identity than the person. That's what it was trying to do. It was trying to make a single-use public toilet access for all. It wasn't ever about just the trans, access to trans people, but that's what people focus on, right? And so FYI, if you ever see within Seattle city limits a single-use toilet and it has a male-female figure on it, call them out. There's actually a Twitter page dedicated for it, so you can report them or you can ask them. But at this point, they should know, right? They were given months and months and months to adjust to that. And the Seattle Office for Civil Rights has a little placard that they can just put over it. So it's all those things. And we know that these health disparities impact the medical and physical health of LGBTQ people who are experiencing these things. And oftentimes they're non-physical, they're emotional, they're mental, and it really can go on and on and on. And then some of the items that are listed here. Here, some people don't even recognize this, but recreational facilities and activities. If someone doesn't fit into the stereotype of a physical body, being male or female, and if you're trying to focus on your health, say for swimming, it's going to be very difficult for that person. right? To even access a public pool, let alone the actual restroom, right? But I recognize some facilities are starting to accommodate, um, just for the purpose of conversation, male and female and all gender locker rooms. And just some, well, I'm going to say it, sad statistics. LGBT youth are two to three times more likely to attempt suicide. LGBT youth are more likely to be homeless. This is a significant number. Lesbians are less likely to get preventative services for cancer. Gay men are at higher risk for HIV and other STDs, particularly among communities of color. And I'm in that world as well. And for the most part, it's because of the social marketing. Oftentimes, the social marketing use cisgender white men faces. And so when a person like me looks at an advertisement like that, I see it and I'm like, oh, that's not for me. As simple as that. Or it's as simple as that, but it's also complex. Lesbians and bisexual females are more likely to be overweight or obese. Trans individuals have a high prevalence of HIV and STDs, victimization, health issues, and suicide as well. And then LGBTQ seniors face additional barriers because of the isolation. I do want to point out locally through the University of Washington and through the work of Dr. Karen Fredrickson Goldson, who's been doing a longitudinal study of LGBTQ elders. It has now become a nonprofit organization called Gen Pride, and they just broke ground for Gen Place, an LGBTQ senior and elder affordable housing on Capitol Hill, the heart of Seattle's LGBTQ community, right on Broadway, next to Neighbors Nightclub, if you're familiar. It's quite amazing. It's so amazing. As a person, I'm not that young anymore, and I'm getting there, right? I'm having to think about this and to be able to see that this can be a future for me. Oh my gosh, I can't imagine what that feels like for other people whose lifetimes it's been about oppression, and to know that we have a safe place to go to. And then I mentioned this earlier already, LGBTQ populations, highest rates of tobacco, alcohol, and other drugs. FYI, especially around tobacco and alcohol advertising, a lot of them were targeted towards our community. Oh my gosh, heartbreaking, heartbreaking, heartbreaking. All right, a little focus on trans statistics. As of 2017, there are about 1.4 million adults that identify as trans. Trans kids and teenagers experience high levels of bullying and violence. I know we're slowly changing. I know we're getting there, but we're almost there. Anti-LGBT violence disproportionately affects trans people, especially of color. Trans people are subject to higher rates of police violence. Trans people experience higher rates of harassment and discrimination in the workplace. Oftentimes, if not always, it's just the way we look. We don't fit the mold, the stereotype, of what maleness and femaleness looks like. Due to these issues, higher than average rates of trans people living in poverty, housing discrimination, again, just because of the way we look. How sad is that? And trans people have been harassed, bullied, and rejected by the people around them. Oh, again, alarming suicide rates. Creating safe space, including virtual. There are many ways LGBTQ allies can support the lives of the lives of everyone in the workplace. When in doubt, ask kindly with compassion. I may rewind a little bit. What we did earlier, the exercise of stating our name, our pronouns, right? Our other identities. Practice that, because if you as the ally, now stereotypically speaking, you are in a position of power and privilege. Role model that. Help us create that space. And even doing those simple things, you can do that at the start of a meeting or any one-on-one conversation, and it doesn't matter. And don't assume that you're doing it only for the people who you assume to be LGBTQ. Okay? Do it for everyone. Like, for example, even if it's just like a one-on-one thing. Hey, Nicole, my name is Alex. I primarily use she pronouns. What are yours? And now I know the first time you do it might be awkward. Yes, it's the first time. You're just practicing, but keep doing it. Believe me, trust me, it will become natural. And if you just keep practicing it, then it becomes the norm, right? It becomes your practice. Like even to this day, like I have some friends who are now doing it. Oh, it just warms my heart. You can make a difference. You just have to start with yourself. All right. When in doubt, ask kindly, but with compassion, right? It's okay to ask. Most people, most LGBTQ people appreciate that you actually ask instead of and versus assuming. But ask kindly with compassion. But don't be too nosy now. Now, again, never assume. All this does, it creates negative stereotypes. Again, normalize the practices, sharing your own pronouns. And I want to clue you in on, don't say like, well, of course I'm a she. Don't do that. Another passive way to do it is your email signatures. Adding it on there, but right next to your name or your title, put down your pronouns on there. It's quite fun, especially now because you can do other things, right? And then also recognize and accept that traditional rules are constantly changing. Again, and I mentioned this earlier, they is now an acceptable pronoun and it's grammatically correct. Recognize also that different individuals have different meanings. Now, a younger person can be okay with using the word queer or even hearing it, but an older person may not. Because generationally, during their time when they were younger, queer was not a good word, right? Even the word FAG. Now you have to consider who are you talking to and if they give you permission. And it might, for the most part, I only really hear it in like intimate settings, like really close friends, you know. But again, be careful and ask permission. All right. Now, as an ally, it's absolutely okay. Watch films, read books that focus on trans lives, on LGBTQ narratives. But again, you have to be responsible for questioning the intent and the motivation of it, because sometimes it might be not a good outcome, right? Be careful when articles sensationalize to create drama, right? We don't want any more drama. We're already dealing with a pandemic. All right. So cultural considerations. Now, this is just really open topic. You know, we talk about POCs, but what do we really mean when we say POC, right? And when we say Black, do we mean Black or African-American, right? And really all I'm saying is, again, ask, right? And when we say Indigenous, we have to be considerate of what is the person's identity. Do they embrace Indigenous identity or Native American, or is it First People? And we know that there's a generation that still refer to folks as Indian. And we know that that is so not PC, right? Because we know what the roots of that is. And then when we say POC, what do we mean? Like even talking about Asians or Pacific Islanders, right? Do we mean Southeast Asian, South Asian? And here's the one thing that this is one of my pet peeves. People don't recognize that Middle Easterns are Asians. It's part of Asia, but no one ever says that they're Asian. They always keep saying Middle Eastern. And part of that is our bias towards the religion, right? And I want to encourage people to also read up on a Seattle Times article by Naomi Ishisaka. This was roughly about a year now. There's local conversation around Asian and Pacific Islander identities. Now, I mentioned I'm very proud of being an immigrant myself. When I was in the Philippines, I never said I was Pacific Islander. Right now, I'm from the Philippines, so I'm literally in the Pacific Islands, right? But then I come here, and then all of a sudden, oh, I'm a Pacific Islander too, you know. But because it's the American white perspective, it's their identity placed on me. Because when I was in the Philippines, I never even said I was Asian. I just said I was Filipino. I know I'm Asian, but as far as like, and I get it, the social context, right? I don't have to tell somebody else that I'm Asian because we're all Asian, pretty much. So it becomes about national identity, right? It becomes about the nationality. That becomes the conversation. And then when we see someone who is a person of color, for example, or assumed, right? We're assuming, right? How many people assume that that person is an immigrant? Almost always, right? So we have to consider the US born or American born. And why is that important? It's because of the culture. Now, assuming that somebody's an immigrant doesn't mean that they're less eloquent in the language of English, American English, right? And just because they're American born, that doesn't necessarily mean that they have no clue about their family heritage, right? We have to consider all of those. And what does it even mean to be American? Seriously, right? And I know that our minds are socially conditioned to think of an image of an American, right? Language is spoken, right? In the family, in social settings. And when I mean languages, I also do mean sign language. I mean ASL, right? And sometimes the language changes in academic settings. Religion, spirituality, all those things need to be considered. And then internalized homophobia, transphobia, biphobia. And I don't mean people who aren't in the LGBTQ community. I do mean people within the LGBTQ community. Just because someone is, say, POC doesn't mean that they can be homophobic or transphobic or biphobic, right? And just because we're LGBTQ doesn't mean we're also racist. Those, unfortunately, they can coexist, right? And I'm looking at the time, I apologize, I'm going over time. And then there's the non-binary now, queer, gender queer, right? And then generational knowledge and history, just that word queer alone, right? And older adult services, elder care, where are we? This idea of senior elder LGBTQ care, this is still very new. We're still trying to really grasp it. And thankfully, locally, we have the work of Dr. Ken Fredrickson, whose work is so phenomenal. So check that out. And I want to encourage folks to see the documentary Gen Silent, Generation Silent, Gen Silent. Beautiful documentary about LGBTQ elders. All right. And then accessibility, you have to think about these things as well. They're compounding issues, auditory, visual, physical, mental health, right? All right, I will finish with links and resources. Now this is just a short list. Asian Counseling and Referral Services, they're for APIs. Ingersoll Gender Center for Trans Issues. Gay City Wellness Center. They're they've expanded to an LGBTQ health movement versus just gay men. Gen Pride is the LGBTQ senior and elder care. Peer Seattle, peer support. It was rooted in LGBTQ support. They were originally Seattle AIDS Support Group, and they morphed their name into Peer Seattle. And recently, they actually expanded into the entire state. So they're now called Peer Washington. The peerseattle.org is still very active. So there's now Peer Seattle, Peer Spokane, Peer Kent, Peer Olympia, and there might be more. And then there's Spokane, People of Color Against AIDS Network, predominantly Black African American services. And then there's Seattle Counseling Service, LGBTQ Behavioral Health. And then if you wanted to check out some sort of legislative, if you were interested in activism, the Seattle LGBTQ Commission, it's one of the oldest, if not the oldest, known LGBTQ commission within a city government. And then there's Utopia, this is just alphabetized, by the way. And then there's Utopia Washington, Pacific Islander trans case management and general support for the trans community. They're based out of Kent. And then there's the Washington State LGBTQ Commission, newly formed about a few years ago under Governor Inslee. And then just some national resources, CDC, there's a specific one on LGBT health. So it's cdc.gov/LGBT health. That's a great resource. And then there is the National Queer Asian Pacific Islander Alliance, or NCAPIA, and you can check them out at ncapia.org. And then you already might be familiar, SAMHSA. And SAMHSA happens to have an LGBTQ page on it. So it's samhsa.gov, behavioral-health-equity/LGBT. So we have a ton of resources that are available at our fingertips. I recognize, I am assuming there's an assumption here of online access, but for many of these sites, they have hard copies that you can review and look through. And I hope that they have them available for ADA access as well. We don't really have time, but I want to encourage folks to contact me. Again, salamat po and thank you. My name is Aleks. You can either call me or email me if you have follow-up questions or even comments. I receive them all. Anything to improve, the conversation. I'm sorry, it's not really a conversation. I was just the only one talking. But thank you so very much for everybody's time. I went over. I apologize. Thank you, Salome, and all the folks at Washington State Clinical Social Work Association. Thank you so very much for having me. And I'll stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Aleks.
We plan on having Aleks back. And so if you guys have any questions, please feel free to send her an email or call as she mentioned. But again, we are very grateful to Aleks for sharing her time, skills, and talents with us. And we are very much looking forward to having her continue to provide us with more items for us to learn and grow and become better clinicians. So again, thank you guys so much for being here today. Folks, if you guys need any support, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to send you my email address. Thank you again and have a great rest of your day. Bye, everyone.